No, my pleasure. So I'm about as far away from Tate as it's possible to get. I'm shockingly far away from what he does and how he did it. So my idea of a good gig is to be able to deliver exactly the same pixel, exactly perfectly, 2, 3, 10 years later, in exactly the same place, in exactly the same picture, with complete confidence that I'm going to get it right 1000%, which is completely different. There is absolutely no randomness in my world at all, which is not completely true, unless it's actually deterministic. So, so my background is, I started off as a fine art student, and I started off in Scotland, up in Grey School of Art in Aberdeen, and I come from a generation where something wonderful happened in the late 70s, and late 70s, which was there was some sort of infection, a bit like AI, where literally the entire consciousness of the UK became dominated by personal computers. And I mean, literally, every single family, within about 2 to 3 year period, got a personal computer. It was an astonishing period. And during those years, initially, you didn't go and buy a computer, you actually bought the components for a computer and you had to self-assemble them. So this is the components for my very first computer, which was an Acorn Atom, and I bought my very first Acorn Atom back in 1979, and it says 80, but it was actually 79. And the reason I'd actually put 80 up there is because I had to buy 2. The first one, I completely messed up. I mean, I tried everything. It was not my forte. I became very good at soldering after having to assemble my computer. Anyway, so I did manage to assemble a computer. I did manage to get it working. There was no programming language. You used to have to program in machine code. And I think it was the 6502 for the Acorn Atom. So if you're an art student, if you wanted to make a picture using this kind of technology, you'd have to go and get a book either by Zax, the Z80 programming, machine programming, or you'd have to go and get one on 6502 machine programming. You'd have to teach yourself how to program, not with BASIC or Fortran or C or whatever it is. You'd actually have to do it with machine instructions. And it was like it was a big deal, and it took quite a lot out of me at the time. And why is it that phones always go off when you start talking? Oh, by the way, that's the theme tune from the 1970s Lord of the Rings, just in case anybody worries. There we go. I bet you it was a spoof call. There you go. Let's try that. No, other one. There we go. All right. So back in the day, when somebody like myself was actually looking to do what we call homebrew, which is build it yourself, teach yourself programming, et cetera, et cetera. The reason for wanting to do this was many and varied. Let me just go back. There we go. But the most important reason for me was that I had a personal grudge with God. I did. It was very personal. My father was a Scottish minister, and I don't know if you know anything about Scottish religion. Protestant religion is pretty full on, and I was brought up in a very religious family. My father was a Scottish minister from the chapel, from the Welsh chapel background. My grandfather was a minister. My great-grandfather was a minister. My great-great-grandfather was a minister. Five generations of ministers. One of my great-great-great-great-grandfathers, who was a minister's brother, went with Livingstone and married later to Africa. So there's been more God in my family than you can shake a stick at. And you'll see that reflected in this presentation, because I have a thing for what's called sacred geometry, which we'll come back to in a minute or two. But my interest was twofold. The first one was that I could see that there was stuff appearing in there was a sort of a media thing where you could see people using computers to make pictures. And I was attracted because HAL, 2001, et cetera, I brought it up with science fiction. 2, because I thought there might be a way mechanically of helping me with my illustrations and my art. And I mean, I didn't really have a good rationale for getting involved in it until I saw this. My girlfriend was a PhD student in Aberdeen University, and she got me illegal access to the postgraduate computing department. And in there was an Apple IIe, there was a Sharp MZ80K, I mean, I could go on, a Commodore PET. And I mean, it was like Aladdin's cave. And also I was playing with the Apple II. I found a very poor, very low quality, poor flight simulator. And it just dawned on me as I was watching that actually I could put my three-dimensional internal images that I was sort of drawing the hard way, I might be able to put them into the machine. I'm certain I could put them into the machine. I could use it to set up my compositions, and it would make my life easier. That was completely wrong, by the way. It's not often that you get to be as wrong as I was. Anyway, why? Because, back to God and my grudge match with God, and that is that I was very interested in understanding God from the point of view of sacred geometry. I mean, it's all, I don't know, everybody knows about sacred geometry, yeah? Yeah, it's like, it's a thing. And there was a thing in my family that nothing was except by chance, and that, you know, you couldn't understand God, yeah? And I went, well, that doesn't actually chime with my experience of creation. I can see pattern, I can see rhythm, I can see regularities. And so it's not as straightforward as, you know, you can't ask questions about why something is. It's good to understand how things can be and how they can be ordered. And in fact, there's a precedence because we can go back and look at the work of the Renaissance painters, Renaissance artists, and we can see that they too were very, very much involved in trying to understand how to represent things with geometry, and that the geometry was more than just random sort of aesthetics. There was actually the golden ratio. There was also a lot of other maths involved. And I got heavily into the whole underlying drawings for my artwork. And it became quite obvious that just like Uccello, with that drawing you saw a few seconds ago, you can get to the point where when you're doing perspective graphics or you're doing perspective drawing, you can just disappear into a plethora of construction lines and ratio lines and lines that actually mean something to you but don't mean anything to the viewer, but they're there to underpin the way that things are distributed across the image. And I thought, well, there comes a point where I could actually bypass some of that meandering or some of that drawing if I could use the computer. So I thought, well, how does that start? And how do I do that? And I thought, well, there must be a way to make lines appear on paper with a pencil or a pen using a computer system. I knew that CAD was actually a thing. I knew that there was, you know, very, very early day CAD. And so the question was, well, how do I, as an artist, as a young artist, take advantage of this technology? How do I turn into a tool that I can use to make pictures? So, okay, so I decided that I was going to find a way to plot my imagination onto paper, and that I was then going to find a way to get that imaging from the paper onto my canvases, onto my as kind of underneath paintings for my gouaches or my watercolors. And so I thought, well, best way to do this, my better way of doing this, was actually to use the plotters that I knew were out there, if I could just find them, to help me with my my graphics. And it turned out that it was quite a tough ask back in that day. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. But there were 3 stages to my journey with plotters. The first one was learning how to use a CAD system, or learning how to work with a kind of early day CAD system to make graphics. And then the second one was, for me, the second part of my journey was to learn how to program a computer to make what I wanted, as opposed to taking what I was given. And the third thing, the third part of my journey, was when I got to the point where I was a pseudo-professional and I had access to like big computer systems and big plotters and big equipment, and I could do pretty much anything that I wanted to do that was in my imagination. So, John, it's hard to believe now, but before there was CAD, you didn't just say, give me a drawing, or give me a sphere, give me a house, give me a cube, whatever it was. You couldn't just dial up these kind of data sets. They didn't exist. There was nothing. And if you wanted something, you would actually have to craft it. And more or less, anything that of any artistic merit, because it was very hard to actually make something with an early day CAD system. I mean, if you've actually seen what they looked like, but they were sort of like, they were great for doing electrical wiring and grids and things like that. So I found that the only way to get what I wanted was to handcraft this information into the computer, which meant basically I had to get paper, and I'd actually have to draw the plots on the paper, point by point, line by line, polygon by polygon, and sometimes it would take days and weeks to do that. Well, the results were pretty good. I was quite pleased with the results. On the left, you have a 3D computer-generated model that I created literally point by point, line by line, and that is the basic shape of a boiler from inside a trawler that went aground and broke up on Torrey Point outside Aberdeen. So that's the kind of the rough three-dimensionality that I brought into play for this particular painting. And what was I trying to do? Well, there was a bunch of stuff. And it's kind of, it becomes very interesting because you'll see this later when I show you some of the Channel 4 logo stuff, because this linear perspective that I was using here, I was using it very, very consciously because I was very much influenced by sort of linear perspective in Renaissance paintings. But the thing that I didn't expect, so the serendipity, if you like, in this journey, is that I didn't expect this to be what linear perspective looks like when you rotate it. I didn't see that coming. That was a complete shock to me. And I want you to remember what linear perspective looks like when you rotate it, because you'll see it again later. Anyway, so this did exactly what I wanted. It gave me the basic fundamental underpinnings for my composition. It also helped a great deal when I was. It helped a great deal when I got to the point where I'd done the underpainting, I'd lost all my original drawing, and I wanted to recreate some of the kind of geometry that I had originally computed, so I could then project it back on top, come back to that in a second, so that I could then detail. Yeah, whoops, what was? Yeah. So I could then detail things like that, which doesn't appear in this. So how did I do that? Well, I discovered that the only way at that time to get my image onto this canvas was to plot it onto acetate and then create an overhead projection and then project it initially onto paper or onto my canvas. And that meant that I was able to then reach back into my original geometry and use that as an underpinning for doing sort of detailed work on the graphics or on the painting. So I then used the same technique for doing paintings like this. The last painting, the Ben Scriel, the trawler one, I've still got. That's the only big painting I've got left. All the others that you see, they're all in collections somewhere. This one and the next one are both in Aberdeen. That's a gouache. I really do like that. That's quite proud of that one. That's a gouache that I did as a pre-study for the actual painting. I'm not terribly sure the actual painting itself was actually a success, but quite like the gouache. Gouache works for me. I really, really love this. And in fact, these days, I'd stop there because that's just who I am now. back in the day, I thought that I had a job to do as an artist, which was actually get the paint set out. Yeah, I thought that was sort of, I never knew, I didn't know of Tate. I didn't know of anybody who was just doing line drawing at that time. In my world, you weren't an art student if there wasn't color and paint and watercolor. It was sort of, I remember my head of department taking me into, taking me aside and going, look, this is Bonnard. This is Bonnard. This is Augustus John. This is Bonnard. Color. All right, mate. Color. Drawing. Do it properly. Well, you were under great pressure to actually knock stuff out that you thought looked like art. This is another project I did. It's same process, overhead projector, projected onto the canvas, projected onto paper. All the drawings, all the 3D models that you see here, I archived, and I still have them. And in fact, Daniel was given, where are you? There you go. Daniel was sent that data set this week. And yet, is it the same data set from 45 years ago? No, because I've had to port it from one data format to another data format. And through the years, it has changed a bit. Also, I lost the original lineup. So I can try doing this in a CAD system or an animation system, but it's almost impossible to get exactly the same field of view, the same camera setup as I used back then. So a big change happened in my life at this point. I moved from being an art student up in Scotland to being an art student in London. I was given a place at the Royal College. I was a contemporary at that time with William, sitting here. And he was off doing his thing, and I was doing my thing. And I, for the first time, had to make my own plots using my own software because I didn't have a university. The Royal College of Art were a bit thin on tech. So I had to write my own drivers and all that kind of stuff. And so this is kind of early days, me doing the graphics, not just programming them, but actually doing all the techie stuff. If you've ever had to write drivers for any piece of equipment, if you've ever had to do anything like that, I hope none of you have, because life's too short, you end up spending literally weeks, months of your life doing techie stuff. And one of the things that it's very difficult to articulate, but a cautionary tale, all right? The reason I'm here today is that I'm a friend of and I'm a pioneer, but cautionary tale. If you get yourself deep into the guts of being a techie, that becomes a thing. You get seduced by the techiness, and the techiness can take you away, and you can ride that wave of techiness, and in fact, you'll get paid really well if you're a really good techie, and that's very seductive. It is a very seductive process. Well, I think that's probably what happened to me. I actually got to the point where I'd abandoned myself as an artist. I'd become a techie. Did I think that I stopped being an artist? No. Did I think I'd become a techie? Was there any boundary? Was there any moment in time when I went from one state to the other? No. Am I still an artist? Probably not today. I think the last time I did a painting was about 2001. And the only reason I stopped drawing and painting in 2001 was because I had a daughter. And there is only so many hours and days in a year, and I wanted to spend a lot of time with my daughter. So I think that was the time when I stopped drawing and painting. But actually, cautionary tale, yeah? So what Jack did, the Tate, what they call Tateographs. I mean, his technical load didn't swamp him to the point where he disappeared into his own technical universe, his techiverse. It was something that he could contain and control and manage. When you do the next stages of this presentation, technically, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. The load becomes absolutely unbearable, and something has to give, and I think you turn from being an artist into something else, and I don't quite know what that is. Anyway, from 1982 to 1984, I was at the Royal College, and I also, because I'd used up my 5 years worth of grant as a degree student and then a postgraduate degree student up in Scotland, I had to find fees to pay myself through the Royal College. I think it was about £4,000 or £5,000 a year, which is like, back then, that was like serious money. I was very, very lucky because I got a job. Somebody interviewed me and said, oh, I could do with you. And the reason he could do with me is because I could program, and I was a graphics person. And he had a thing set up, and I'm almost running out of time. He had things set up in Middlesex University where he provided animation for TV. And as you'll see in a minute, you know, this goes back to the cautionary tale. You get to the point where you work for the man, and eventually you stop being somebody who does stuff for yourself, and you start becoming somebody who does stuff because you're doing stuff. Yeah, you no longer are an independent, and it's a very seductive process because the money's nice. Anyway, whilst I was working for John, I was also at the Royal College, and I was approached by half a dozen well-known names. People like Yesha Rakart and Edward Anatovich, I got to know very well. And this chap, Keith Critchlow, used to be a real go-to. Did you meet Keith Critchlow? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And he gave me some good commercial work, and he got me to do some stuff. And I enjoyed doing it very much. And he got me into his Islamic X-pattern constructors. And I did loads of stuff for him. And I learned lots and lots of things. And he was fantastic. But here I am. I'm no longer an artist. I'm now a graphics artist. I'm somebody who does stuff for other people. I was working, whilst I was at the Royal College, I also had a job, which was helping to pay for my fees. And I got this job working, as I said earlier, working for this company, this consultancy doing television graphics. And here's the equipment. No pictures. So if you were doing an animation and you're doing graphics, you do it all inside your head, in your mind's eye. You type it all in. You'd hit a button. You'd then have to run half a mile to a machine that would actually output the results. And it would be yes or no. Then you go back, et cetera, et cetera. And then later, a couple of years later, I was working with a thing called the Tectonics 4000. And that was the first sort of kind of proper graphics machines. But someone like the Middlesex University would have one of those spread over about 400, 500 people. So you didn't get much of a show. But that was the state of the art at the time. This was the premier package at the time, Fortran, written by a chap called John Vince, who's still, you know, a legend in my world anyway. Another person who I got thrown at was Harold Cohen. Professor Peter de Francia, he was a fantastic prof. And I'm not terribly sure if he knew what he was doing to me, but actually he did it anyway. He threw me at Harold. And so I was recruited by Harold to help him with his Tate exhibition in '83. He was a fantastic chap. I enjoyed his company very much. Did I learn much from him? The only takeaway I've got from Harold Cohen was, and the ICA in the evening lectures that he did, I think he did 2 or maybe 3, and somebody said, how does, see, this is one of those moments in time where you guys are going, oh, that was quite interesting. All right, so somebody said, how does your Aaron, in this case Aaron 2, know when to stop drawing? And he said, I don't know if it's documented, but his reply was, I think I'm correct in saying this, he said, when the rate of change of information across the picture plane reaches a certain statistical threshold, Aaron stops. That's what he said. Yeah, and that to this day has stuck with me because it was a seminal statement. I've got all his papers. I've kept everything. I keep everything, boys and girls. I've got everything documented. If you go to www.gjedwards.com, you can find everything I've ever done. It's all there. I've captured it because I'm trying to get a digital memory together before I get gaga like my mum. And anyway, so high points working for Harold. Harold thought that I was a bit lippy. I can tell. I can remember him thinking that I was a bit too uppity because I'm going, well, this Aaron, how does it work? How does it do this? I'm not convinced. You could see it in my eyes, and he could see it in my eyes. And anyway, so I was very lucky. I was lucky that he had the patience to put up with me. But the high points for me working for Harold was that his lectures were wonderful, and also I sold one of his drawings to Christopher Lee. For all of us today, Christopher Lee is known as Saruman in Lord of the Rings. At the time, he was the #1 Dracula. Really, he was the top Dracula of all time. And when I looked up and I saw Christopher Lee, I nearly needed to change my underpants. All right, so in conversation with Harold, me being lippy, I said, well, how does it work, et cetera, et cetera. And he was not very forthcoming. So I said, well, look, I can do an animated Harold Cohen-like thing. And he went, well, you know, if you insist, off you go. And I did. And I did a whole bunch of Harold Cohen-like stuff. I've got a whole bunch of plots from that time. And the only difference was they were animated Harold Cohen, as in they weren't just individuals, they actually morphed from one to the other. It's sort of your kind of thing, yeah? And it was, I mean, yeah, I've still got half a dozen of these sort of plotted things. I've sent some prints out to you guys. But yeah, they're a moment in time. And finishing off as fast as possible, this is all back to the beware what you want, beware what you wish for, cautionary tale. There comes a point, technically, when you are in computing and making computer graphics, which is at the completely far end from our friend in Wales, where somebody asks you to do something like hidden line removal. This is where maths comes in. It's the first time where maths really hit me, and I didn't regret that. But somebody said to me, I think it was my boss, John Vince, he said, we need a hidden line removal algorithm, we need a new hidden line removal module for the Picasso system. Would you like to do it? And I went, all right then. Anyway, and the difference between with and without, that's with hidden line removal, that's without hidden line removal. And you can see that it's a very important thing to have, because if that was without hidden line removal, you wouldn't have this sort of graphics, clean graphics that you have there. So hidden line removal was like this big thing. And in fact, it's the beginning of the end for me, because what happened was I got into matrices, I got into maths, I got into lots and lots of maths. I'd always been a bit of a maths boy, but I got into lots and lots of stuff that got me deeper and deeper into the bowels of a machine and into maths, and I'm still there. And just finally, Channel 4. This is some of the kind of work that I was working on. Another part of the cautionary tale. I was a chap from the countryside in Aberdeenshire. I'd been brought up in a farming community. I used to muck the pigs out. I used to kind of like, I lived in a village of 200 people. And here I was in London doing the Channel 4 graphics ident with Lambinen, Martin Lambinen. That was over a period of 7 or 8 years, from being somebody living in the countryside up outside Banff in the northeast, to doing stuff with Martin Lambinen, one of the most iconic graphics sequences designed by one of the best designers ever. Martin is just like, he's a legend. By the way, the reason that I've put test in is because even though we were doing test animations for him, we didn't do the final animation logo system, logo animation, because we couldn't generate shadows. And they had to take the animation that we'd done, and they went across the States to a company called Digital Productions, who did Tron, and they got the Channel 4 logo done by them with shadows. It seems a bit sad, really, and this comes back to the cautionary tale. You get yourself into this world, and it becomes a race. It becomes a technical race. We lost this technical race because we didn't have shadows, so we got shadows. And it went on, and then there was ray tracing and real-time ray tracing, and there's a radiosity, which is one of the most current sort of flavors. It has just been this vast arms race that's gone on forever. And so what was the point of this? I started as a passionate fine artist, passionately doing fine art stuff, wanting to be an artist. And here I am, 45 years later, and I'm working for the man. And I'm thoroughly enjoying working for the man. So, you know, when I saw the man, we're talking about, you know, BAE and Rolls-Royce. I've just finished a huge project doing concrete, managing concrete systems for big concrete manufacturing companies. And we're talking, so my last project was handling 45 lorries, possibly 50 lorries, of coming in for concrete, having concrete filled into lorries, into trailers, blah, 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 and doing that every hour of the day, 7 days a week, in all weathers, with my computers and my software, monitoring all the lorries, seeing them come in, get to the point where they're actually validated, in goes the concrete, and then there's number plate recognition and everything else. You lose yourself. You cease to be a graphics person, and you become, I don't know, what's the name for it? It's not a techie. I'm not a techie. I'm a graphics techie. I don't know. Industrial inspection. That doesn't seem to do it. By the way, the title of this thingy bob. It says on the front here. Here we go. There we go. Embodied agents. My clients call those applications. Yeah. So you can call them embodied agents, but actually there's a whole world out there where there are people like me with cameras, and my cameras are the eyes, and even sometimes the ears of applications that manage the world of industrial manufacturing, whether it's crisps or whether it's sort of concrete or whether it's monitoring welds on the inside of jet turbines. Pictures come in, I have to interpret the pictures, analyze them. I have to do it in real time, up to 400 frames per second. And then all of that stuff, it's behaving, it's seeing, it's behaving as if there's actually a cognition going on with the computer. It's having to make decisions based upon what it sees. So in my world, that qualifies what I do as being a maker of embodied agents. There we go. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm sorry I went on a bit, but yeah.
And yes, question over there.
Thank you, that's really interesting. Just a question, you say coming from your art background, you say you've gone away from that, the technology.
Yeah.
Do you see any aesthetic appeal or beauty in the systems themselves and well-written code? Does that have an aesthetic appeal?
Beyond my ability to answer. Yeah, I cannot. It's so personal and so complete and completely enveloping. I love my code. I love my maths, and I offer what I've just said then, in the hope that you guys will reach out and understand what I'm trying to say. But thank you for asking that question. Yes, William. Oh, sorry.
Great talk, Gareth. So I can remember your studio very well at the Royal College of Art. You'd be painting there, you'd be doing, and then you'd dash up to Bound Street on the Piccadilly line to Middlesex, and then you'd spend a few days there, and then come back to the Royal College. You were sort of juggling.
It was dreadful.
And the computer work, how you did it.
Yeah.
And then you had a few rows with Peter de Francia, I remember about.
Over randomness.
Because you also had a sort of dissatisfaction with modern art as well. So you were getting more and more involved with computers, but you were actually quite unhappy with the way art was going.
I'm far more at peace with myself now, and I don't have any problems with modern art. It is what it is. I am what I am. It's just whatever.
But you were very bold in your arguments at the Royal College, I remember.
Well, because so William, if you weren't bold at the RCA, you got rollered.
Yes.
You got absolutely mollered. I mean, it was a vicious, and Professor Peter was just appalling. He really was. He was dreadfully cruel, but he meant it well. He thought he was making my life a better place by having these interminable arguments about random. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So the Picasso system, that was the first attempt to empower artists.
Yes. So Picasso stood for picture, image, color algorithm, subroutine orientated. Yeah? There.
Yeah, I'm just interested in how it all goes back to God, because you kind of started with.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
No, you're right. That's the whole point of this cautionary tale, is that I lost the plot. Did you like that? That was actually a bit of a link there. Yeah, so I'm talking about plotting. I lost the plot. Yeah, I did. And I became a great I am. Yeah, seriously. I mean, William can give you the story, but I became a great I am. In the 80s, it would be normal in the 80s for me to have, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 title sequences or graphic sequences on national TV. It would be the 6 o'clock news, 9 o'clock news, breakfast time news, Channel 4 news, Newsnight, all of this done by me. And so I would daily have, I don't know, 30 million people look at my stuff every day. Some of my sequences, like the 6 o'clock news, they went on for 9 years. 9 years of crap graphics. I could, every time I watched it, I could see down the side. I hadn't rendered enough pixels. I could actually see the studio down the far side. It was really embarrassing. So the point is that, and then I went from television titles into doing commercials, into doing motion pictures, and I got paid lots of money. I became a director of a company called Kodak. Didn't that work out well for them? And I don't think I think I did disappear at my fundamental aperture for at least 20 years. Yeah? And I don't think I actually got back down to earth until I moved out of London and I inherited 3 small boys and I had a baby daughter. At which point, you know, my world changed and it is still, you know, a different place. But I lost the plot. Yeah? Right, anything else? Thank you very much for putting up with me.